that our scripture for today is just one of those scriptures that's kind of just rubs me the wrong way. And I don't entirely know why. I understand the scripture on a theological level, on a practical level. I'm not a bit dumbfounded, and I feel a little incomplete at the end of the scriptures. During these past weeks of Lent, we have dwelled in the Gospel of Luke, but now we enter into John's Gospel, which takes a very different tone than the other Gospels we have in the Bible. Prior to our scripture, we hear a story about how some of Jesus' enemies were plotting to kill him. And directly after our scripture, Judas Iscariot greets the chief priests and plans to famously betray Jesus. Our scripture for today is sandwiched in between those two pivotal events in the life of Jesus, as he is nearing closer and closer to that cross. The scripture takes place at the home of Lazarus. You remember Lazarus. The guy who just a few days earlier was dead. Cold and not breathing, dead. However, Jesus did not leave him that. Jesus raised him from the dead as a sign that pointed to Jesus' own death and resurrection that would happen shortly after. You might remember that when Jesus was notified of his friend Lazarus' dire condition, Jesus did not go to his friend right away, which was odd. When Jesus received word about Lazarus, Lazarus was still alive, but by the time Jesus arrived, his friend had died. However, Jesus knew that that wasn't the end of Lazarus' life. That wasn't the period in his life. Jesus brought to life that which was dead. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Easter story. Now, amidst all of this, Lazarus' sisters, Mary and Martha, were present. And they were also present in our scripture for today. Most likely, the event that we have in our scripture is a celebration party that is taking place at the home of Lazarus. Family and friends have gathered together to rejoice in the fact that Lazarus is alive. And so the gathering for a meal that is surrounded by mourning, they are gathered for a meal that is surrounded by jubilation. However, this gathering takes an interesting turn. Martha was working in the kitchen, serving her guests, but her sister Mary takes on a very different role. She takes a pound of very expensive perfume, the best of the best, and begins to pour it on Jesus' feet and wipes the perfume on Jesus using her hand. This act is very humbling as she gets down on her knees and anoints Jesus in her own special way. Now, if you were in this story, what would you be thinking? What would you be feeling? What would you be experiencing? What does the perfume smell like? Is it the most wonderful smell that your nose has ever experienced? Is the smell, for better or worse, overwhelming? Are you thinking, what in the world is Mary doing? Or are you thinking, I know exactly what Mary's doing? Do you approve or disapprove of her behavior? In our story, we have both those to approve and disapprove of what Mary did. Judas, you know Judas, how can we forget Judas? He just does not approve. He interjects and criticizes Mary's behavior, and instead states that the perfume should have been sold and the proceeds be given to the poor. We are told in the scripture, via parentheses, that Judas says such a thing not because he cares for the poor, But because since he was a thief, he wanted to share in the proceeds for himself. In opposition to Judas, Jesus very much approves of Mary's actions. Jesus tells Judas to basically be quiet, because Mary has a perfume in order to be prepared to anoint Jesus at his own burial. And I'll add my own parentheses by saying that Jesus implies that the time of his burial will be soon. He also tells Judas and all others that they will always have the poor with them, but they will not always have him with them. See, I'm with you, Jesus, up until that last bit. That last sentence, in fact. I have a hard time reconciling that last sentence with what I know about Jesus. That's the last sentence. That you will always have the poor with you, but you will not always have me with you. This seems like a dig at the poor. And I say this all due respect to Jesus. But I kind of agree with Judas. I do. To me, after reading this passage as many times as I have, I've always aligned myself with Judas. Only a person who likes the underdog. But that's where I shift every single time. Now, before you stone me for siding with Judas, let me explain. First, Judas just gets a bad reputation in the Gospel of John. Judas just can't catch a break with the author of John. He just can't. So, I feel bad for Judas. And I don't believe that Judas was entirely bad throughout all his life. After all, there must have been something special about him that Jesus saw in Judas to make him want to be a disciple. Because Jesus isn't stupid after all. Also, one of the core values that I see in Christianity is the caring for the poor and the other least of these. A vast majority of Jesus' time was spent with the poor, the outcast, the prostitute, the widow, the least of these. And if he wasn't directly spending time with them, he was defending them and their worth to others. As followers of Christ, if it was important to Jesus, and an arguably caring for the poor was, we should do the same. But why does Jesus seem to favor himself over the poor in our scripture? In the last sentence in our scripture, it seems as if Jesus flips the script and does a 180-degree turn from the norm. And that's what I don't understand. That's what I can't reconcile with the emphasis on the poor. I struggle with that. And perhaps I'm looking at the scripture from the wrong angle, and I probably am. And I've read numerous commentaries about this passage, but nothing has been said to relieve my struggle. But if anyone out there can help me, please do so. I'm open. While I have struggles with this passage, what I do know is that what Mary did in our scripture was very extravagant. She participated in a very extravagant act, and maybe that is perhaps one of my hang-ups as well. Mary seemed to go overboard. First, she uses a whole pound of perfume. Expensive perfume, the best of the best. And when we get perfume now, it's just in a little bottle. Just imagine a whole pound of perfume now. The enormous quantity of that. If Judas is right, then that perfume that Mary had and used cost 300 denarii. And now, one day of work came out to about 1 denarii. So 300 denarii would have equaled almost a whole year's salary. Nearly a whole year's salary on perfume. Now, there's no denying that was extravagant. Mary is also extravagant in that she didn't just pour the perfume on Jesus and use her hands to spread it, but she used her hair to soak up the perfume and bathe